Find your balance. That is our goal here at Boost Health. Welcome to episode number 55 of the Boost Health podcast. Today's show features a focus on running form with special guest David Jacquier of Joint Dynamics. If you're interested in any aspect of running, from going faster to being more efficient to reducing your injuries, this is a show for you. Get your notepads ready because David shares a ton of super helpful information. I can honestly say I think about running completely different after talking with David, and he's actually made it fun for me again. We cover gait analysis, shoes, injuries, mobility, strength training, cadence, the thoracic spine, if foot strike is important, common mistakes many runners make, running music, and some easy cues for your head, shoulders, arms, hands, torso, hips, knees, legs, and feet, and a whole lot more. So first, a couple quick announcements, and we'll jump right into the show. Patreon. I just set up a Patreon page for those who want to help support Boost Health. As many of you know, this podcast and videocast is my way to share wellness strategies. I dig deep into the research on any given topic, and occasionally I have guests on the show to share their expertise. The show requires a ton of my time and effort. There's also financial obligations, including bandwidth, equipment, and travel to make the show possible. If you find value in the show and you think it's worthy of your financial contribution, I would really appreciate it. Thank you very much. If you're interested, I'll link to the Patreon page in the show notes and blog. Extra Boost guides. The very first Extra Boost guide is now available, and I'm offering a 50% discount. All you have to do is enter SHOW55 at checkout. That's SHOW 55 at checkout. And this guide, it's a full body strength training guide that requires no equipment. And it's 37 pages of descriptions and videos and audio cues to get you through the workout without any issue. It's the same cues that I use with my personal training clients. So I will link to the guide in the show notes and blog, and then you can enter in the code to get 50% off. All right, now here is episode number 55, proper running form, more speed, more efficiency, and less injuries. My guest on episode 55 is David Jacquier. Now, David spent 20 years in investment banking before he moved over into the health field, and he's actually spent the last 6 years in executive health and high performance training. He's married with 3 children, he's part owner of Joint Dynamics, and he's a long-term resident of Hong Kong. He's an avid athlete with a variety of interests, including cricket, Australian rules football, running, and speed water skiing. David is a specialist in executive health solutions and biomechanics and has a passion for problem solving. And when training a client, his philosophy is to get good to better to best. And to do this, it is a case of test, train, and then test. And David is often heard saying, if you're going to be a bear, be a grizzly. If you learn one thing from this show, it is that you shouldn't try to change your run form with a quick little 2-minute YouTube video on foot striking. There's some serious science to running properly. I hope you enjoyed this episode and it helps you become a better runner. Well, I have a special guest on the Boost Health podcast with me today is David Jacquier. Did I get that right, David? Yeah. Okay. I only practiced it 5 or 10 times. And David, can you please tell us what your role is here? He works here at Joint Dynamics. Can you please tell us what your role is here and how long you've been in this specific role?
Yeah, thanks for that. So far, the Joint Dynamics is a company that was sort of born out of a friendship with a physiotherapist who was particularly had great skills in Hong Kong. And the history that I have is that I was a very good friend and he wanted to go out on his own. And so Joint Dynamics was born of a physio frustrated, wanted to put his stamp on the Hong Kong scene with regards to his expertise. He tends to think a little bit left of centre. And so we started a business about 6 years ago with just 5 of us. And so I'm one of the directors, one of the owners, with Colin Simmons, who's our clinical director and CEO, Andrew Cox, who's one of the local Hong Kong fitness legends. He's quite an exceptional person as well. And so with the 3 of us and my wife administrating, we've built the company over 6 years now. We've gone from sort of 5 to 10 to 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 something employees now. It's pretty fluid. But my role here is multifaceted in the fact that I'll be part business development, I'll be part personal trainer, I do swimming analysis. But what I've found to be a specialization that we had a sort of an inkling that might be an undercurrent in Hong Kong with the running community is more running analysis and gait analysis. And so my specificity within the group is more to do with optimizing people with regards to projects that they may have. And those projects can be, I want to run a 400k Gobi ultra marathon, or I want to run a faster 10Ks, or I just don't want to get injured when I go and do some when I do some exercise. And so ultimately what I've done is over the period of the last few years and prior to starting Joint Dynamics, spent a lot of time catching up on education. I was a bit of a sports nerd as a kid, but then spent a lot of time in the business environment. And then sort of transitioning from business over into this secondary business like Joint Dynamics, we spent a lot of time traveling to catch up my anatomical education, you could say. And so I spent a bit of time down at the AAS down in Australia looking to do some running biomechanics and athletic coaching. And then I went to spend some time at Queensland Uni doing swimming biomechanics so we could sort of round off that triathlon sort of scene. And then spent a year going backwards and forwards to a place in Michigan called the Gray Institute. Now, it's in a tiny place called Adrian, which is about 45 minutes out of Detroit. And those guys are pretty much what we consider to be the, probably world leaders in true analysis of biomechanics and cause function and sharing the load and effectively making someone a hell of a lot more efficient or trying to rehabilitate them. And so, we spent a year going backwards and forwards to Michigan, and I've got a fellowship of applied functional science from that private institute, and the guys there are pretty sharp. So, in a real nutshell, that's been probably the last 5 years of me personally. Prior to that, it was sort of amateur sport and a bit of geeky knowledge that sort of dragged me to where I am. So that's me. Now the business Joint Dynamics it's one of these things. Businesses in Hong Kong either succeed quickly or fail quickly. And if they succeed quickly, you're obviously onto something that works. And we've found that, we've unearthed a need of the local high performance or high demanding personnel and fast paced lifestyle that Hong Kong has. We've found a demand for, this style of more analytical fitness. People want to outsource their problems to you. Well, they're going to outsource their fitness. Well, if you do a good job, you'll tend to go okay.
Thank you. And the reason that I came to see you, Dave, is because I've had this pretty terrible knee pain for the last year, and I've tried all the things that I know how to do to fix it. And I finally decided I'm going to go see a professional. And so through the Dragons, which I've talked about on the podcast a few times, I've heard your name come up a few times. I've heard Joint Dynamic come up a few times. And I was like, okay, I'm going to actually go and find out if there's something upstream. Is there something upstream with my crappy running form that's causing this knee pain? The only thing that's more scary than my running form is my swimming form. I don't want you to ever see me swim. You would have a whole book to write about how bad it is. But, my previous, I guess you could say, background with gait analysis wasn't so great. So I used to work in Southern California as a personal trainer, and I would remember seeing all my clients coming in with the exact same pair of Asics. I'm like, what is going on? Why do you guys all have the same shoes? And they were like, oh, well, we did a gait analysis, and they said it has to be this shoe. And of course, it was the top of the line, very, very wealthy people. So they were buying the top of the line model. And so that was sort of my first view of gait analysis was, let's just say, oh, you're overpronating or you're supinating, and so let's just get you in this shoe. And then I started realizing, okay, well, there's actually more to this science, and I think it's evolved a lot with the technology and with the just the knowledge and the science behind it. So came to see you, and I really wanted to share a couple of things that I've seen just in studies that I think are interesting, and we'll talk a little bit more about how poor my stuff was and how you're working to fix me. And I'm already seeing some good results. So I wanted to share quickly, there's this meta-analysis done on the UpToDate website. And it noted, and this you probably see this too, nearly half of the runners, this is in the US, but I have a feeling it's probably global. Half of the runners in the US get injured at some point, and that the knee is the most injured area. This is a huge study. And then 2018 study in the American Journal of Sports and Medicine, they followed 300 male and female runners for over 2 years. And they actually found that 73% of the women got injured at some point during those 2.5 years. And 62% of the men were injured during that period. And this is interesting. And then 56% of those that got injured again. So I wanted to ask you first, is this consistent with what you see here in your facility? And, are you guys seeing more people for injury recovery? Or are you seeing, I know you work with a lot of elite runners. Are you just trying to add speed to it, people, or is it sort of 50-50?
Interesting, those stats. It's to think that there's 73% of women and only 62% of men. What we've found is that women are quite proactive when it comes to injury treatment and injury management. And so if there's something wrong, they'll put their hand up and say, listen, I think there's something wrong. Can you help me out? Can you give me some feedback on what my style's like? This hurts, And so what I tend to suggest is that 62% of males is really 85% because guys will tend to just go, no, it's fine. No, it's fine. No, it's fine. Oh, now I'm completely broken. Fix me. And so there's an alphaism or there's a machoism with guys thinking that, something's injured, but they'll go, no, it'll go away, or that pain will go away. And it'll happen to the point where a guy will, this is a gross generalization, but it fits pretty well from what I've seen, is that a guy will push himself to the point where he then just can't do anything. It's like pushing a boat out. You further push it out, the longer it takes to come back. And so those guys that do get injured will take twice as long to rehabilitate because they've waited twice as long to tell you about it. And so in that respect, it's, those numbers are 73% being females. Yep, no problem at all. I'd suggest that over a 2-year period, it's almost to say that it's unavoidable, because if you're a runner or a serious runner, what you'll do is you'll find your threshold and then try and push it. Yes. Well, if you're going to push a threshold, injuries will be the path of least resistance. And so if you're running faster, you've got a greater cardio, well, it's going to put more stress on your Achilles. If you've got greater Achilles and then you're going to run harder, well, you may be putting more pressure through your knees. And so if someone's serious about improving their running, I doubt very much that anyone will have gone through injury-free at all, because if you're serious, you're pushing your limits. And if you're pushing your limits, well, something will give at some point over a 2-year period. Annual mileage, I'd suggest, if you're a serious runner, you're probably doing, upwards of 35, 40 kilometers a week. And that's conservative. Like a lot of the ultra runners are doing like upwards of 100, 110 kilometers a week. And so if you think, 110 kilometers a week, how many steps that is, how many, minutes on your feet, it's pretty rare that anyone's going to go through without an injury. So with regards to your injury stats, the fact that 56 were injured more than once is probably pretty accurate, because most runners will not only get injured, but they'll return to play before they're fully fixed. And so you'll have someone whose Achilles is just coming good and they'll get almost better, and they'll then run for the next month and that same Achilles will play up. Well, that's not actually a re-injury, but it'll be classed as a re-injury, because most runners are so fanatical about their running that they just don't want to stop. And so part of our role here is, getting the right approach to their injury. We manage people through injuries because they want to run in races. And so you're never going to have someone that's perfect. It's, 1 in 10 people will be perfect going into a race. 5 of them will be carrying some sort of niggle. The other 4 will be suboptimal because they're just recovering from an injury. And so when it comes to working out how to manage things, there's a real play between making someone perfect and, helping them get the result that they want. And there is a compromise there, and it's a very imperfect compromise. But if managed correctly, you're not going to permanently maim or scar someone. They'll just have they'll have a result that you have to manage the expectation of that result. Yes, you're going to run, instead of running 4:35s, you might run 4:45s because you don't have the same power that you've got. But yeah, you'll manage people through some injuries, through their races. On your point about, do we make people faster, or do we make people more robust, or do we fix people? It's pretty rare that people will have the foresight and the appetite to be preemptive with regards to their fitness and their strength. You'll tend to think that someone will like something, they'll take up running, they'll go for a run, and then something will be sore, and they'll go, oh, this is sore, will it go away? I don't know if it's natural, if it's not. If someone's intelligent about this, they'll ask a question pretty early on. If they're not, they'll think it's just a normal part of wear and tear of, starting the running journey, in which case you're in a bit of trouble, because you'll find that injuries will be, knee injuries are obviously a big thing, but you'll find that injuries will be tendon injuries, and a tendon will take a period of time to get injured and takes a period of time to fix. Muscles will tear and repair quite quickly, a strain or tear will repair quite quickly, but, tendons are things that really, patella tendons in particular, these sorts of things, they take a long time to repair, depending upon how long it's taken to damage. And so it's a case of, most of the time you'll find people will only come to us after it's hurting a bit, because prior to that, they're feeling like they're going quite well. And if they're going quite well, then they increase their intensity, whether that's duration or speed or power or one of the variables of intensity or load. They'll just increasing it until they do eventually get injured or do eventually feel that niggle, and then they'll come. And because up until that point, they know what they're doing, And so it's in that respect, it's good. Now, you've touched on a really good one in the fact that most injuries are knees. Well, the one thing that the guys at the Gray Institute, and I've got to give them all the glamour for this one, is they very quickly debunked the idea that your knee's the problem. Your knee's basically where problems are, present. Normally, the knee is a problem of a incorrect alignment, a bad ankle, or an incorrect foot, mobility, or a lack of hip strength. In that case, they used to say your knee's just a dumb joint between your ankle and your hip, and so. It's just taking the load. You're inefficient somewhere or another, or you're loading not linearly over that joint, and so that's where it presents, rather than that's what the problem is. So someone goes, "Oh, can you fix my knee?" And we'll tend to look at someone's ankle mobility first up. Okay, how's your ankle mobility? Oh, my problem's my knee. Yeah, I know. Give us a look at your ankle. Oh, okay. Now give us a look at your hip strength. My problem's my knee. Yeah, I know. But give us a look at this, and then once you go through that, then that gait analysis component comes into it, and saying, okay, and we'll touch on this probably a little bit later, but are you symmetrically bad, or are you asymmetrically bad? If you're symmetrically bad, well, then we're happy.
Yeah.
but if you're asymmetrically bad, well, then there's problems.
Right.
So that'd probably touch on a lot of your injuries, and definitely that the knee component of it. Now, as I said, the knee is where it presents. And the knee is where you will get damage, but it's not the cause of the concern, or it's more than likely not the cause of the concern. And that's something that we are very confident here. Unless you've had an impact injury, in which case, if you've had a knee taken out playing football, or you've had some sort of aggressive change of direction, as in maybe a tennis player changing direction, in a more medial fashion, moving laterally, and you're putting strain on medial ligaments, or you've jumped and landed incorrectly, in which case you've got ACL sort of issues. But generally, running's a repetitive injury, and so it's a death by 1,000 cuts. It's not going to feel bad until you've done it enough times. And if you're taking, a good runner's going to have a cadence of 170 to 180. A minute. If you're doing that for an hour or 2 hours, 5 times a week, well, it's tens of thousands of mistakes that you're possibly making. Yes. And then that'll add up. So that's probably where I'd go with regards to access to the knee.
I guess my personal frustration is, and I'll quickly note on this, sports med doc back in the U.S. named Dr. Jordan Metzel, he was interviewed on Runner's World, and I know you guys believe in this too. He said that repeat injuries are a huge problem for runners, and you touched on that. And the biggest cause of running injuries is not doing enough strength work. That's his thought. And so that's my first love, is strength training. And I've always been pretty good about a balanced program, 3-dimensional functional strength training. So I feel like I'm the guy that shouldn't get hurt. But as you saw with my mobility screening, with the Gray screening, I had some imbalances, and those could have potentially been what's causing my issue. But that was one of the things that I was almost most impressed with. All of the technology and everything that you suggested for me was fantastic. But before we did anything else, this is what I do with my personal training clients is we took off my shoes and we saw what can my body do in 3-dimensional space before we even tried to make me go do something athletic. I love that, because before I'm going to go have somebody go perform an overhead press, I need to know if they have, rotator cuff issues. It's the exact same thing. So I thought that was fantastic. But can you specifically just touch on why this type of mobility screening is important for running? I think we've alluded to it, but I know you have some more scientific facts on why.
Definitely. Now, this particular type of screening is really quite impressive, because it's to the layman, they're going to look at someone doing a series of lunges and a series of motions across a series of planes and then say, well, what does that give me? Does it give me a score? Am I 32 out of 32, or am I, 25 out of 32? That 25 out of 32, what does that mean? Like, screens around the world, everyone wants a number. Where am I with regards to my norms? Now, we've done a bit of work with almost a hybrid of the Cirque du Soleil over in the House of Dancing Water, and they run a show over in Macau that's pretty impressive. And you're dealing with some people that are just phenomenally athletic, like incredibly impressive. And what a similar screen would be for them would be, you've got someone that can bend themselves in a pretzel, but yet they've said they've got a stiff back, and so you're saying, well, okay, ultimately you would have been a 37 out of 32, like you're off the charts with regards to this particular type of numeric screen or value-based screening, and saying that, well, what feedback can I give you based off a number? Well, ultimately not a lot. So what you're looking for is effectively, how do you move in a symmetrical fashion? Do both your hips extend the same distance? Does your overhead reach allow you to get thoracic extension? These sorts of things, and vice versa. Do you rotate through both hips the same distance? If you're symmetrical, you'll tend to go quite well. Now, what tends to happen is you look at the ankles first, because the first thing that touches the ground is your foot, and so your heel, your calcaneus will go in one direction, and your midfoot will go in the other direction. That's like that pronation. And then as you toe off, your heel flicks back in one direction and your forefoot flicks in the other. And so your foot and your midfoot has a counter-rotational element to it. And so if you've got calcaneal eversion and midfoot pronation rotation, and your foot spreads, you want your foot to spread. You don't want something sitting under your arch that blocks your foot from spreading. Because the second you block that foot from spreading, well, you take your big toe or your first ray out of action, and then if you've taken your big toe out of action, well, that's a big part of your propulsion, and it's a huge part of your balance. And so if I block you from pronating, well, I'm reducing your amount of balance. And if I'm reducing that, 75, 80 times, 85 times a minute, well, that spreading and that shock absorption that your heel and your foot spread then takes, then has to go somewhere else. And so rather than pronate and use your muscles to support yourself, well, you've blocked the muscles in your foot, and you stabilize it, then go, okay, well, what am I going to use next? And so the first joint's going to be the knee. And that's saying, okay, well, unless I land perfectly all the time, my knee's going to take an inefficient load. And so we're really big on feet. You're really big on ankle mobility. Much as you have clients who you would look at their ankles when they look to do a back squat, for instance, say, if they've got no ankle mobility, well, they're going to really struggle with their back squats. You see the guys who are, your CrossFitters and your Olympic lifters, well, there's a really good reason they wear these shoes with enormous blocks in their heels. It's to allow them that greater degree of, vertical strength, because they can cheat a lack of ankle mobility. Whereas with a runner, I'm looking for maximum ankle mobility so that they can keep their foot on the ground for longer behind them, which provides them with an economy of movement that works really, really well. So to break it down, to look at the screen, you're saying, okay, first, the second you lunge, well, I can see what your back foot's doing and your front foot's doing. It shows me whether you've got ankle mobility and sort of calf mobility and a deal of elasticity through your lower limb. From that, we go straight past your knee, because if you're lunging, it's either bending or it's extending. And so it's going pretty much straight until we get you to twisting. And then you go to the hips. Now, if you've got everyone will have a dominant hip, because when they go to kick a soccer ball, they'll use one leg to stand on and the other leg to kick. Well, the leg you're looking to stand on, your posting leg, will tend to be stronger and stiffer, in which case it's a generalization, but we tend to find quite often that hip doesn't extend as far. It's a stronger, stiffer hip, whereas your kicking leg or your other leg will tend to be more fluid and have a greater range. And so if you've got one hip that extends and the other hip that doesn't, well, you're going to get a torque through your spine. You'll build up an inefficient tension through your running gait. And so all of that just over time works its way somewhere else. It means that you might swing your arm a bit harder one way to compensate for a lack of hip extension. Like, the amount of things that can go wrong are phenomenal. But if you can break it down to just some simple forwards and backwards movements for any glaring immobilities or any glaring asymmetries, you can nail a few down. You'll be different from side to side all the time, but what you're looking to do is you're looking to make your asymmetries not enormous, just little, or just reduce them. No one's going to be perfect, and you're never going to aim to get someone perfect, because it'll just never happen. But if you can reduce their asymmetries to the point where you can progressively overload any part of their training to a point where they won't injure themselves, you've won. So can I make you similar enough that I can increase your load without risk of injury? And then you allow that person to take control over their own load a little bit. And then from that point onwards, you're not going to have a unilateral stress. You can have bilateral stress. The best part about it is someone goes for a really long run and goes, "Oh, I'm really tired. My legs are really sore." I said, "Are both of them sore?" They go, "Yes." "That's okay." "Good." Both of you, they go, "Oh, my calves pulled up really tight." I said, "Both of them?" And they'll go, "No, my right calf pulled up really tight." And you go, "Okay, well, you're either overusing it, you're compensating, it's not as strong as the other one, your ankle doesn't flex to give you the sort of range that you need, or there's something that is repeating here." And so you go, "Okay, well, is it always sore?" "Yeah, it's always my right." And you go, "Well, then I can't increase your load, because you're just going to get more injured." And so what the screen does is it takes you from the bottom to the top. You're looking at your ankles, and you're looking at your hips, and then you're looking at the things that don't have bilateral sides to it, like the spine. So you're sitting there going, am I getting extension through my spine? Can I get thoracic extension, like the mid part of your spine behind your rib cage? Can I get that to bend in a sensible way so that I can create sort of like a C shape through my spine and get my hands above my head? And it means that my shoulders can then move quite freely, whereas desk jockeys and people at desks these days are quite kyphotic. Everyone's got a right-handed mouse, and so you'll find that most people have got a pronation in their right shoulder. They'll have, they'll use their traps more, and so you're just going, can I correct that so that you can sort of be a lot more even? Strengthening our runners' back makes them run faster, and it's something that they'll never do ever, because they hate it. But yeah, then again, touching on your point of strength, that's what we do. Like, I don't sit there and say, you have to run 25 Ks this week. I need you to do 400 hill repeats, or I need you to do 3 times, 400 track repeats and all this sort of stuff. I've got a team of guys that I refer to that provide that sort of detailed specificity. What I try to do is I try to make someone robust enough that they don't break down. And that way they will definitely improve, because they'll increase their load. And so it's about that simple. We make people more robust by making them more symmetrical, and then we put them through enough strength training to feel confident that not only their muscles can take the new force and load, but their connective tissue strength can do what it needs to do to not get injured. And so you'd know when you've got someone that you might be doing some rehab work on, if you've got like Achilles tendons or patella tendons, it's counterintuitive that what you need to do is you need to put that particular tendon, when you're rehabbing it, under increasing stress. What you're trying to do is you're trying to put that Achilles under even more stress in a controlled isometric fashion to get that tendon to have greatest blood supply so that it can repair. So it's a real counterintuitive sort of thing that someone goes, "Oh, this hurts a lot. My patella tendon in my knee hurts a lot." Okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to sit up against the wall and not move until you feel like that's burning. And it's everyone goes, "Oh, really? This is just terrible. I'd rather be out running." Correct. Yes. Achilles the same. Can I do, eccentric, heel, drops until it burns. And only after you do that repeatedly, X amount of times, do you repair. And so our job is to make sure that hopefully that doesn't happen in the first place. We're putting people under enough stress that their, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 steps isn't going to cause that injury. So we're huge advocates around strength and mobility.
All right. So all of my endurance buddies that don't do strength training, it's not just me barking about it all the time. You heard it from the man himself. So, okay. So let's talk about that. So you've got high, especially runners. I know you've got some elite runners that come through here. What I like to promote, not just about sport, just for general wellness, general strength and conditioning, 3 days of strength training, full body, functional movements a week. Is that realistic for an athlete of the caliber that you see come through here? What do you guys usually recommend for those folks?
It's hard to talk a runner away from just wanting to run. When we've got quite a spectrum of different athletes that run through the place. We've got chronic condition. You're talking anorexics and morbidly obese, and people with significant health problems that you're trying to provide a safe and comfortable environment that they feel like they can just get moving again. And so part of the facility is chronic treatment of particular injuries. We also do a hell of a lot of rehab, like post ACL sort of stuff. And so in that respect, it's very controlled, and we're babying people to it. We just want to give someone the confidence that they can be active again. We transfer through sort of the middle ground, which is sort of the bulge of the curve effectively, probably, at least 1 to 2 standard deviations of our entire client base would be the guys who are either second-time athletes, like they were athletes between the ages of sort of 16 to 22, then they had to go off and have a career and et cetera, et cetera. They've got a career in a place that they like it. They've got 2 kids. They're getting a bit fatter. They're trying to go, listen, I've got the resources to outsource my health and fitness to you, and we get them back into shape. We go, okay, what do you want to achieve? We set them some goals and get that done. They're time poor, and so they're trying to work out a way that they can optimize everything that they do. And so they're not going to think of doing exercise themselves. They're going to get someone else to do that for them. And so they come in and we'll periodize a program. Ideally, we see them 3 times a week, because that's 3 times out of 160 something hours, 164 hours of a week that we've got control over these people. Yeah. So it's 2% of their life that we're controlling. Ideally, we try and give them like nutritional guidance and consultation, and we try our best to crack the whip without making them resent us. And that some people take it quite well, other people don't take it quite well. But at the same time, if you're managing someone's expectations around the result that they're looking to get, well, you have to do it, right? They're paying you to do this. You're seen as an expert. You live and die by the success of some of your clients, and so, and in saying that, the trainer's very proud of what they're producing. Like, I live vicariously through a lot of my runners because there's no way I'll run as fast as these guys. One of the runners that we started looking after quite some time ago ran a 33 flat for 10 Ks the other day, just absolutely torched it. And that was in 33 degree heat and humidity. So, this guy's got some real jets, but and originally we nicknamed him the Mule because his gait was so terrible. His arms were running all over the place. He was terrible. But this guy's now got a VO2 of 88, runs like the wind.
I didn't know that was possible.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. So every once in a while you unearth just a gem, and you see this gem turn around and take shape and polish up, and you just go, that's fantastic. So it is pretty interesting getting some of these people through, and you take people on certain journeys. Some people it's life-changing, but the consistency is the key. You'd see it as well through your clients. Compliance is one of the biggest problems that you're going to find. And so you need to find the simplest way for them to comply to simple things, because it's too easy to not. So compliance is one of the things. Hong Kong's a dynamic place, and so everyone will find a reason not to do what you're doing, or I'm time poor or whatever, but you're there to get a result, and so you have to get a result. Strength training, mobility, as you mentioned, like your predisposition to full 360 mobility, without doubt the key. How do you break that down? How do you functional fitness? Everyone's functional fitness this, and people will call CrossFit functional fitness, or strongman functional fitness, or certain types of animal flow functional fitness or gymnastics, it sort of gets labeled, functional fitness gets labeled everything. Okay, can I function? Yes. Are you fit? Yes. But as you mentioned, what you tend to do is you go, can you control the end of your ranges, right? So if I bend down and then stand up again, you don't get injured bending down, you get injured on the change of direction. So can I control the end of my ranges in all of the things that I want to do in my life? And so, I had a great athlete the other day bend down and twinged his back, unpacking the dishwasher, right? He was put in a twisting motion that he didn't have control of the end of his range. Like, mate, he can run like the wind, but he can't turn around and twist sideways unpacking a dishwasher. So we'll tend to try and find the most dynamic and safe way of moving someone in 3 dimensions so that they feel like they've got control getting into that motion and getting out. The change of direction is the key. And then if you've got that sort of control, well, you can do pretty much anything.
All right, so you put me through the mobility screening. This is what you do with everybody with your program that's going through the gait analysis. And you filmed me, which is not unusual when you're doing a gait analysis. In your program, you look at strike, load, toe off and swing phase, and upper body. And you had an idea of how tight I was in my thoracic spine, especially after my mobility screening. And you found more than 3 issues with me, but you honed in on 3, which I appreciated. It made me feel better. And I want you to talk about why just 3 in just a second as well. But the 3 things that you suggested for me, this might help other people, which is why I'm sharing it. You said my cadence was super slow. I needed to speed that up and lean forward a little bit more. So you gave me a short-term goal of 165 to 170 on my cadence. Now you clocked me at 156, and I went back and I looked at my old runs, and I was between 158 and 162 average. So I think you were spot on there. So I did a couple of the things you suggested, and then I hit 174 on my first run out, which was great. But I shared with you I was sore in my quads for a few days afterwards. So it was, but both quads. You wanted me to push my arms forward more because I was, for those of you watching the video, I was swinging my arms across in front of my body, which is terribly inefficient, which makes sense. So pushing my arms forward the direction I wanted to go, not wasting a whole bunch of energy, swinging across my body. And then you noticed a little bit of inequality in my toe off. So I was pushing off more with my left, interestingly enough, which is the side I was also hurt on. And could be one of the reasons why, who knows? And so I was trying to just mentally drive more with my right side. So quicker cadence, forward lean, pushing my arms forward and driving off of that right side. And that was enough for me to think about it once. And it was kind of hard to do all 3 things at once, but I think I was pretty successful. So and you gave me a long-term goal of 180 on my cadence. Is this something that you suggest for everybody, or is this dependent upon what the athlete is trying to do, their build, that type of stuff? Can you talk to that?
Certainly. Now, a lot of it depends. You'll really struggle to get a really tall guy to do 180 plus. They've got big, long levers. It's a pretty rapid strike. The key to cadence is there's no set rule, but ideally, if I'm looking to provide the least amount of stress on my joints, I want to share it as much as I can. And so if I take 2 great big bounds, what will tend to happen is I'll end up striking the ground out in front of myself, in which case I'm then decelerating and sticking a force through my knee. And so with an increased cadence, you'll tend to find that people strike underneath their body a little more. And so then it provides far less force and deceleration of all things when you run. And so if I can imagine running 100 meters, you do it in, say, 120 steps. Well, that's 100 meters covered in 120 steps. That's however many newtons per meter. If I can cover those 100 meters in 140 steps, well, the individual impact is obviously reduced somewhat. And so I'm then providing a marginal less force over the same distance with the same downward force of your body. Like as an endurance runner, you want to decrease the amount of force that you're putting through each individual stride. If you overstride or you have if you have a slow cadence, it'll tend to find that obviously you're getting up in the air higher and then you're landing harder and then you're doing it less often. And so the same distance will be higher, harder, less often, and you'll be decelerating. So can I slowly chip away at someone's cadence and say, okay, in a controlled fashion, and not saying like you're a normal size athlete. If you were, 3 inches, 4 inches taller, well, I think that 180 would probably tap you out. You'd be 175 to 178, something like that. That would be optimal. Now, optimal is like it's all about an economy of movement. Now, that would be a pretty handy economy for you, I'd imagine. We find guys like your Kipchoge's, these guys, they're back up in the 190s, 195s. We've had a particular runner here in Hong Kong who's quite well known Italian bloke, and he's at 205. They're road runners. The road runners will tend to have a much higher cadence, and they're just like bang, 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 bang. They're falling forward and not falling over, and so that tends to have them running very, very quickly. They'll have strong hamstrings. Their heels will clip their butt on the way through, and so. From a technical perspective, you say, can I work on this technically? Can I increase my steps? And when you're running, it's just like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's really quite metronomic in the fact that you can go 3 steps a second, 180 steps a minute, you're done, right? And so I'll even go as far as to, sending people clips and music that'll be 175 beats a minute. You just turn around, I just want to run it, You'll get on Spotify and they'll go, okay, this run is a 175 beats a minute playlist. And so you'll just go bang, bang, bang. People will turn around and jog to the beat. And then it makes it very easy. It's something that you then don't have to think about. And so that's it, the fact that, testing someone on a treadmill is quite difficult because they will tend to overstride. So their cadence will be unnaturally slow on a treadmill because your feet are being taken out from underneath you ultimately. So you do have to test someone with a bit of incline to it, and also have to adjust to the fact that you're putting your foot down and effectively it's being taken out from underneath you a little bit. You still get quite a good look at how someone runs. And I can't chase after you with a GoPro down at your feet down the local path, and so it's impossible to do it in that respect. So there's a little bit of an adjustment, but at the same time, you get a pretty good look at it. So the fact that you went back and looked at your data and you were 158 to 160 was pretty sensible. It sort of married up quite well. Now, the arms forward thing, looking at how you rotated. Effectively, you're a strong guy with a pretty decent upper body, and so what you've got is a lot of power that you're effectively washing off rather than sending forward. Now, we're looking to get vectoral motion forward. Some people, you'll say, listen, can you stiffen up, your core rotation? It's a case of you've probably got, a disproportionate amount of upper body power that you're effectively not using correctly. And so if you could get your thumbs to flick your hips and then drive forward rather than effectively cross your body with a forward motion, you're going to do, a hell of a lot better. What you'll find if runners' back muscles and if they can have their hands going in the right direction, your left arm counteracts your right knee's force. Just like sprinters have an enormous upper body because they have to have a strong right arm to effectively counterbalance their strong left leg drive. So to keep them central and to keep them moving in a straight line. So saying, how can I get all my vectors going in the one direction? How can I get my knee drive and my hand going in the one direction? How do I get it? And so you can't have this huge difference in upper body rotation and lower body counter rotation. So with you in particular, because you're quite strong upper body, if you could get that to go forward rather than across yourself, well, then you're picking up free stride length, And so if you could pick up, just say you picked up 1 inch of free stride length, that's 2.5 minutes in a marathon that you're getting for free, right? And that's not much. You're talking 1 inch of stride length, And so imagine you picked up 1.5. Well, that's 4 minutes off your marathon time, right? You give that to someone who's a decent runner and you say, okay, get a stronger back and you'll run faster. They go, oh, and then you go, okay, well, watch this. And you'll get them to test a half marathon time. You'll make their back stronger, and then they go, I've run, 45 seconds faster off my half marathon. I've run a minute, and they were, weeks apart under similar conditions. And so eventually they'll come to the fact that you just need to make someone economical. You don't need to make someone particularly phenomenally powerful. Well, obviously Kipchoge, these guys aren't phenomenally powerful. They're just super economical. So how can I make the art of running as impact free as possible? And how economical can I make a particular person? How can I get their vectors going in the right direction? So the arms forward's definitely key, because you're picking up something for free. Like, I don't want you to have more cardio. I just want your arms to swing a different way. So that was really good. Now the toe off, and what people tend to misunderstand sometimes with propulsion is your quadriceps when running are generally decelerators. And so when your foot hits the ground, your quadriceps decelerate that motion. So your quadriceps don't actually extend your knee. What extends your leg when you look to get propulsion is ultimately your glutes want to fire to extend your hip, send your hip into extension, and you want to push off your toe. And so, yeah, your quads are going to be used as to take on that impact to set yourself up. But to get true speed, you're going to be pushing hard through your calf, and you're going to drive your hip hard forward. And so in that respect, yeah, your quads will work well to help, but your real speed is toe off, how hard your hamstrings can pull in that circular motion, and how much your glutes can drive your hips forward. Like when you squeeze your glutes, it'll tend to send your hip into extension. Yes. Well, that's running. Hip extension is running, toe off is running, and then how can I get that leg around in front of me fast again while I get my hamstring to work? And so most running is posterior chain, calf, hamstring, glutes, whereas your quads are decelerators when you impact the ground. And so everyone that's sitting there doing just phenomenal amounts of quad work and squats and all this sort of stuff without doing their hamstrings, glutes, and calves will end up being incredibly quad dominant running, and it's like you're running while sitting in a chair. Wow. Yeah, and so you don't get hip extension, you don't get toe off, and if you Google triple extension of anything, they use it for overhead snatching. People talk about overhead snatching, triple extension. Same can be said for running. You see, the Adidas and the Nike and the New Balance posters, and you always see that perfect stance with someone pushing through their toe, their knee straight, their hip straight. That person's done it once for a photo, but at the same time, if you can get somewhere near that, it stops you running like you're looking down at the ground and you're sitting on a chair whilst you're shuffling forward. So when it comes to toe off, and in particular with regards to your left, as mentioned, your left is quite a strong hip. You've done, you use that hip for propulsion. What we were looking for was your right glute and your right hip and your right toe off to be just more powerful. And so you didn't end up being dominant and coming back with a gallop. You didn't want like this left to hit, push, land heavy on your right, left to hip, push. And so you're using your left to get most of your forward momentum. Your right landed and allowed your left to come around to give you that propulsion again. Your right landed, carried you through, and then you're looking to get propulsion off that left again. And if you're going to get that left, as you push off your left, you're going to have to swing your right around to counterbalance that left propulsion, and hence it gave you that counter rotation problem. So yeah, it's like there were bits and pieces, but when you broke it down, I'm going, okay, get some good tunes so you can go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You're looking at going, sit tall, and the thoracic extension was one of the key things to get your arms to move down past your hips. Because if you can't get your spine out the way, you can't get your shoulders to go back, and your arms aren't going to come past your hips. And so you've got to get your spine to move so that your shoulders can move back. And so that's just an economy of motion. That's not a fitness. That's not anything else but just going, okay, this is just pure economy and vectoral force. And then can I work on that strength component of what I'm after? I'm going to drive through this right hip a little bit more. And so from that, you've come in, you've run faster, your cadence is higher, and there's a chance that from now on, your cardiovascular will be challenged where it probably wasn't before. And so ideally, that's perfect. If your limitation to your training is cardiovascular fitness, we'll run more. And so you find a lot of marathoners, they go, well, how do you get better at running? Well, you run more. And I'm not going to dispute that, not for 1 second. Fantastic analogy of a marathon runner that I spoke of a few years ago. We had a very famous Australian marathon running coach come up to Hong Kong, and he said it's like for those people who know what a phone book is, they're very thin pages, easy to tear one by one, but it's a very thick book. And so obviously if you put enough of these pages together, it's a book that's pretty solid. And so if you're looking to class your longer distance running or your running goals as just like a phone book, each page might be a little thin. You might not think it's fantastic, but what you're doing is you're creating a pretty solid phone book. And in time, that'll be pretty hard to tear.
So we're talking a lot about thoracic as probably just because I struggle with that. I've been working a lot on trying to mobilize it and strengthen it. Do you have any go-to mobility moves or strengthening moves for the thoracic spine that you can share with us?
Yeah, without a doubt. A lot of the time you're trying to find a way of getting that mid spine mobility. What tends to happen is your chin tends to become a very good driving force, and so if your chin pushes up and you're looking at the sky or looking at anywhere above you, you'll find that the rest of your body follows, and so your chest will drive up, and so you'll use your chin as a driving force. What you want to do is use fixed points of contact. So what you might do is you might stick your hands and your elbows up against the wall like such, and then all you're wanting to do is isolate a movement. When you're mobilizing your thoracic, you're trying to stop everything else moving but your thoracic. So you'll fix the points of contact of your arms and your elbows, and you'll fix the point of contact of everything else, so that you know that a particular motion isn't getting lost in an elbow flex or extension, that the movement's not getting lost in some sort of weird rotation. You go, the only motion that I'm getting, and that thoracic spine is very rigid, and so you're not looking for a phenomenal amount of mobility, you're just looking for some. But if you, just like people grab their foot and try and stretch their quadricep, well, some of that quadricep stretch might get lost in a back extension, or it might get lost somewhere else. If you can make your levers as fixed and as short as possible for any type of mobility, you know you're going to get it pretty much right. If your levers are very long, there's a good chance that that stretch disappears in a wrist flexion or an elbow extension or a shoulder rotation. Whereas if I can fix my elbows and my wrist and everything, the only thing that's moving is going to be your spine. Your shoulder blades will wrap around your spine, and you'll get it to move backwards and forwards over time. You'll tend to be quite sore. If you get it right, you tend to be quite sore for a couple of days, because you're trying to move something that hasn't moved in a while, or something that doesn't like moving. Like the mid-spine facets that you look at, well, the lumbar spine's meant to move in rotation, flexion, extension. Same with the cervical spine. You've got to move your neck from side to side, around and around you, whereas your thoracic spine's supposed to be something that your rib cage is attached to, and so you're protecting your vital functions. And so it's not meant to flex a lot, it's not meant to extend a lot, it's not meant to rotate at all. And so you'll find that the design of your spinal facets, intelligently enough with the human body, doesn't really move that much. But if you can get your spine to move not just at the bottom of your spine to the mid spine, as you get closer towards your rib cage, if you can have a more even curve through your spine, where you don't have a particular axis of rotation where you'll find it jams and these sorts of things, that smooth action will end up sending your hips into extension. So as you drive your chest forward, your hips will extend. It just happens. To get your chest to drive forward, can you lift your chin up? Yeah, well, if I lift my chin up, my chest goes forward, and instantly I've got hip extension. And so to turn around and say, okay, look upwards and ahead when you're running if the road's flat, because you don't have to worry about it because the road's flat. But yeah, if you can get your chin to be a driver when you're doing any sort of upper body spinal movements, you'll tend to find that that's a relatively simple and easy, foolproof way of getting the type of mobility that you need. And so that's, golfers are really hard with this. If you're a golfer because they're hunched over all the time, but the second they go into a backswing, well, they've got their spine has to extend, or their shoulder blade doesn't wrap around and they don't get a swing in. If a golfer tries to swing and they've got no spine extension, they've got a really short back lift, and they're trying to muscle everything through. And that's how they get golfer's elbow, because they're trying to muscle something through when they should be sharing the load through their body. A runner will have problems when they're not sharing the load through their entire body, when their foot's not collapsing correct, when their knee's not landing straight, when their hip's not taking the load, when their hips aren't extending, when you don't have a thoracic spine extending, all this sort of stuff. It's not about being phenomenally strong, phenomenally quick. It's about being unbelievably economical.
That's a really good point. And admittedly, I've just been trying to do things that are awesome mobilizers of the spine, and you can do a Google search and find a whole bunch of different possibilities to do that. But I think that's a good point. If you look at the anatomy and what it's there for, it's not supposed to be this super supple piece of your spine. It should be mobile, but only slightly. And so with that drill with your arms on the wall. I think that's actually a really good one that most people should be able to do without maybe trying to throw them right into a back bridge or something. That's excellent. So I wanted to talk a little bit about cueing, because you've obviously got some really good cues and just some basic tips to help runners too. So if you could just give us, if we started from the head and worked our way down, if that makes sense to you, David, just give a couple of cues in each position. Like, I think based on what you said there, our heads probably should be looking forward versus down. So just head and shoulders, arms, looking down the body, and sort of from a runner's perspective, what we should be doing with each of those parts.
Yeah, no problems. The cue that I give most people when, like, even if you're a pretty handy runner, before each run, if you can stand with both your feet still, and then all you do is you fall forward and don't fall on your face. And so what'll happen is instinctively you'll put your feet out underneath you. Now, this sounds so phenomenally simplistic, but what that does is create what they call a fall angle. And you'll see sprinters have an aggressive fall angle at the start of a sprint because they're trying to get it. They've got a phenomenal amount of power. And as they get through the first 30 meters of a sprint, they'll gradually stand up and run taller. And so that's the best way to describe a fall angle, how far your shoulders are past your point of impact. And so if your shoulders are 5 degrees or just past your point of impact, well, you're going to be running incredibly fast, okay? And it came down to, if you're overstriding, well, your point of impact is going to be in front of your head, in which case you're actually decelerating. And so the key cue that I would give nearly every runner, when you're starting a run, stand still with both your feet dead next to each other, and then just lean forward and don't fall down. And then your feet will just land underneath you. What will happen is you'll tend to run quite fast, and you'll tend to fire up your Achilles and your calf quite quickly. So you'll fall into the normal pattern that you actually run in naturally and have done from the ages of 0 to however old you are. And so now some people go, oh, fall angle, I've got this fall angle thing. And what they'll do is they'll end up flexing at the hip to create a fall angle. So that what they'll do is they'll just lean over from the hip, which gives them back problems, hamstring problems, and whatever else. And so if you were to envisage someone, putting a rope around your hips and pulling it forward, that creates a nice, lovely little lean, and it means that you'll stand very tall, you'll run very proud-chested, and your hands will get back past your hips, and it makes it beautiful. It looks fantastic. For most people, that's very unnatural, and so it takes a little bit of getting used to, but the more you do it, the more you map it into your system, the better it'll be. And so starting from the head up, you're sitting there going, okay, where's my line of vision? There's nothing worse than looking about 2 feet in front of you, because obviously your posture is pretty crap, and you're leaning too far forward and everything's looking down. You've got no forward momentum. If you can look, say, 20, 30 meters in front of you, that's going to give you a pretty decent sort of trajectory, if you'd say. Then from the shoulders down, interestingly, you look at someone's jaw. If you've got a loose jaw and a floppy bottom lip, it means you're pretty relaxed. You'll see people running the other way. They've got pursed lips and they're blowing hard through their mouth. They're hating their run, right? They're really hating it. They're blowing hard. And so every time you think, I'm doing this hard, just relax your jaw. You find sprinters do it. Their lips are all over the place. Their face is wobbly. They're super chilled out. They're in the zone, but they're sprinting, right? You're thinking that should be really hard, but they know that the more relaxed their head is, the more economic they'll be. There's no tension in their body. They're not wasting any energy. They're just relaxed. Everything's working how it should. So looking up, a relaxed jaw, like you've got a real floppy jaw going on. If you've got a bit of thoracic extension, like if your chest is out the front and your hands are nice and relaxed, it means that your neck's not carrying your shoulders too high. So you go, okay, if my thumbs are brushing my hips, I'm not carrying my hands really high and crossing my body a lot. Definitely don't run with a drink bottle, because you end up with a really shocking shoulder injury on one side and you'll end up with a terrible hamstring on the other, because you're carrying a weight effectively making you non-symmetrical. Right, so if you're carrying, just say you're carrying 200 or 300 grams in one arm, like you're carrying 200 mils of bottled water in one arm. Well, what's that making you do? You have to push. You either tuck that arm in and don't let it swing, in which case your opposite hamstring has to work really hard to get the job done, or you're putting a lot of stress through that shoulder, and that extra grams in one hand is giving you greater forward momentum off one swing and not off the other. And so you become incredibly, biased towards tucking a hand in like it's a wing, and using your other arm, and then it means that your counter rotation's all up the creek. Yeah, exactly. You're swinging the arm right around the side, and so never run with a drink bottle unless you've got two, and then it's like, well, you're not going to do that. Phones are the worst. Running with a phone and your headphones on. Get an MP3 player, clip it to the back of your hat, do whatever. And so that's taking care of your eyes, your jaw's loose. If you're flicking your thumbs by your hips, your shoulders are relaxed. And so that's your upper body taken care of. Because if your arms are coming through straight, you're not counter-rotating, you're not having this big crossover. Going through your hips, as I said, if you can imagine someone's pulling a string from your hips and pulling it forward, you're right as rain. And then you're just thinking, how do I keep my feet on the ground behind me as long as I can? And so you don't want to feel like you're picking your foot up early and swinging your leg from the hip. You're going, how can I get extension behind me? Just like that Adidas, Nike, New Balance, poster. How do I push off later? How do I get my foot off the ground as late as I possibly can? Because that means your foot is a mile behind you. And then your foot will come up and flick your bum, and you'll have that beautiful circular gait motion. If you can think, keep my foot on the ground longer behind myself, instantly you'll lean forward. Yeah. So you're thinking, okay, I'm going to keep my foot on the ground longer, and that'll take care of everything else. Like your calves will work harder, your hips will extend further, your butt's going to squeeze harder to get that foot to stay back there. And then momentum will just carry you forward. And so from that, you're saying that that's a ton of cues and probably far too many to think about it. But all you're going to do is, look up, flick your hips, and keep your toe on the ground. That'll be pretty much it. You'll find it when your form starts to get tired, you'll overstride and everything will hurt. You go, stand up. Let your bones take care of your load rather than your muscles take care of your load.
Now, if you were listening carefully, you didn't hear David say anything about you must land on your forefoot or you try to get rid of heel striking. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is something that's changed maybe as we've learned more about the science of running. Because I think you can start from the ground up, which probably doesn't sound like the right thing to do, and go, okay, I must start striking in my midfoot. And then you're forcing that, and you're not thinking about all these other things, where it sounds like if you talk through it like you just did, maybe not all those cues, because like you said, it's a lot, but if you're working on those 2 or 3 things you said, your foot's naturally going to go into the position that it should, right?
Yeah, you're not going to find anyone that weighs 110 kilos forefoot striking. They'll have plantar fascia problems and their Achilles will blow up in a nanosecond, right? Someone over 110 kilos can do that for about 50 meters, right? Obviously, there's an optimal striking pattern when it comes to actually running, and it's obviously not aggressive heel striking, because if you're aggressively heel striking, it means that your foot's way out in front of your body. And so all you'd think about is land under yourself, because it means you're not decelerating. If that means a mild heel strike, so be it. If midfoot strike, whatever, forefoot strike, if you've got a really light body and a stiffness of step, well, then that's fantastic and you'll run very, very fast. But all you're looking to do is strike underneath your body so that your hips can help take some of the load of that downward force. As you get better at this and as you want to get faster, and if you're wanting to run shorter distances at higher speeds, well, then that striking pattern may differ. And you might want to go, okay, imagine I'm a basketballer or a netballer or like someone that wants to change direction quickly. Well, obviously, landing on your heel is not going to be the fastest way to get things done, but landing on your toes isn't either. You're going to find that forefoot strike will get you changing directions, and you'll be able to change your momentum over that strike. But at the same time, we're running in a straight line. I don't have to change directions. And so if I can be economical as possible, all I need to do is land underneath myself, fall forward and don't fall over. And so we never ever tell someone, you've got to change the way that you run. The more you land underneath yourself, it's impossible to heel strike. If your feet land behind your center of gravity, you're running on your toes almost. Like, it's so marginal. You're talking about a 5-degree fall angle creates the difference between 8 kilometers an hour and 15 kilometers an hour. So all you need to do is land underneath yourself, and you're running really fast, like you're bloody quick. So yeah, don't recreate someone, because the second that you do, you're most of the people, as I've mentioned, are 35, 45. Well, they've got 35 years of doing something one way, and their body's adapted to that. They've got tensile strength through Achilles and ligaments, and, they've had shoes that are a certain heel to foot elevation, heel to forefoot. Now, people talk about the fall of a shoe, and it's the difference between the height of your heel and the height of your forefoot. People talk about barefoot running and all this sort of stuff. Well, if you're going to change shoes, just do it gradually. You can't turn around and go from a 12 mil heel over forefoot elevation and go to a flat foot shoe, because just that 12 mils means that your Achilles has to stretch that little bit further on every single step that you take, because eventually your heel will touch the ground, which means that your Achilles is getting longer by maybe 12 mils, which is phenomenally large. And if you do that with force associated with it, you're going to have an Achilles problem real quick. You're going to have plantar fascia problems. So I'm all up for changing shoes. Run in whatever brand you like, run in whatever you like, but change it around. But you're not going to go, okay, I've only run in 12 mil drops for ages. I'm going to go to 4 mil drops, because you'll get injured real quick. Barefoot running, well, it's a case of going, that's something that you would incrementally introduce over a very long period of time, and you're going to be sore and it's going to be miserable. And so just don't do anything quickly.
Yeah, that's good advice. If you read Kelly Starrett's book, Ready to Run, he talks about how, similar to what you're saying, it's not about the shoe. It was never about the shoe. You need to let the foot act like a foot, but you can't do that overnight. They talk about the same thing. If you're going into a zero drop shoe, you need to do it very slowly. So if you're, typically running 5K, maybe just that first K is in the zero drop shoe, and then you finish in your normal shoe. I think that's really good advice. Now, as a coach, if you're trying to get the foot to act like a foot, like Dr. Starrett says, and we're trying to strengthen up the musculature of the lower leg and the foot, would you ideally like to have somebody move towards that? Do you talk about shoes with your folks, or do you just let them run in whatever they're comfortable in?
I've got to be careful here, because I've got some strong opinions about certain types of brands of shoes and what their functionality is. Some shoes will be ultra cushioning, in which case that's great. People like running them. They feel good. Ultimately, I love someone to have the ability to propel off their big toe. If you can propel off your big toe, or if you can have that big toe connection with each and every step that you have, well, you're recruiting all of your accelerators. Like there's your calves are obviously your gastrocs and these sorts of things, and your soleus and your Achilles are all very good. They're big muscles and they certainly help, but you got your peroneus, longus, and these sorts of things that are really the whip to your step of a push off. If your first rail or the big toe of your foot, if that doesn't have an active part in propelling you, well, you're taking out key accelerators, if you get what I mean. And so you're not getting that plantar flexion and toe off that you really would like to have. People who run slow and steady on big cushion shoes, well, obviously they feel good because it's cushioned and they feel like they're just standing on a bunch of on a cloud. And I'm not going to say that that's a bad thing in time, but it ultimately takes away a proportion of the function of what you really want to be using. You want to be using you want to have connectivity with the ground. Your heel wants to strike, your foot wants to spread, you want to push off your big toe for propulsion. If a shoe stops you doing that, well, then it's suboptimal. Right. It's not to say that you can never wear those particular shoes, big ultra cushion shoes, to stop, to make you feel a little bit more comfortable. But ultimately what it ends up doing is it masks an inefficiency somewhere else. Like if you feel you need to have big, fantastically cushioned shoes to get through a 30, 40, 50K race, it may be masking the fact that you just haven't got the strength through your hips, or your style's a little bit out of whack, or your hips aren't extending, these sorts of things. Cross-country running and sky running, hill running is what a lot of people do in Hong Kong. And the reason why a lot of people use ultra cushion shoes over here is because they descend down steps a lot. And so I can completely understand why people would want to use them and why they feel so good, because you're giving yourself a little bit more reduction in impact force as your gravity's taking you down a hill onto a concrete step. So, it's horses for courses in a lot of respects. But if you're flat running and you've got an undulating track, there should be no reason why you would need some massively over-cushioned shoe. If you're looking for maximum feedback, you won't find a track runner that runs in anything, more elevated than a rubber band stuck to their foot. They're just going to want the maximum amount of feedback. They want to feel their big toe push off. And so it is a bit horses for courses, but yeah, that's it. When it comes to shoes, yeah, you don't want to be unilateral in your approach. You want your foot to be able to adapt to pretty much anything. You want the mid tarsal joint or the mid component of your foot to be flexible, and you want that to be able to turn and move and spread your entire foot. And so the toe box of a shoe sometimes is pretty good. If you're running for a long time and your foot's swelling, you want to make sure that the toe box sort of gives you a bit of room to spread. But otherwise, yeah, get your shoe to do as little for you as possible.
That's great advice. So I've got my zero drop shoes and my new couple of things that I'm working on with running, but I'm working into it slow. So I think that's good advice. Speaking of that, I want to be mindful of your time with just a couple more questions, Dave. So I'm coming back from an injury. I'm trying to do the right things. I'm working on the cues that you suggested, making some progress with Cadence. It's very hilly here. For those that don't live in Hong Kong, you can go out your door and be climbing a pretty big hill real fast. And I've tried several times, probably not with the right form, mind you, but I've re-injured myself a few times, and I don't think I'm doing myself any favors by trying to ascend and descend these hills. So I'm just trying to keep it flat and even going on a track, so it's sort of soft and flat. Would you recommend trying to be in sort of a controlled environment like that whenever you're trying to come back from an injury and sort of changing your running form?
You want to listen to your body really closely. And so you'll find that the biggest problem most people have when they've got knee injuries is descending. And people hate running down hills. That sounds really crazy to the non-runner out there. But running down hills is more painful than going up them, because running down hills, you've got all of your weight plus gravity plus, the angle of which you're running, adding greater force to a landing. Now, when you're running down hills, the only things that's decelerating you are your quadriceps. Like, you're not propelling yourself because you're ultimately got gravity doing the work for you. So imagine, I'm quite a heavy runner. So imagine I've got 12, 13, 14, 15 kilometers an hour of 84, 85 kilograms landing on a single leg. Well, trying to decelerate, your quads are just blowing up. And so running down hills, you want to be running shorter steps with lesser impact, and understanding that running down hills is where you're going to do most of the damage to your knees. Because running up hills, you're never going to go that fast to actually do a ton of damage to your knees unless you... Yeah, and running up hills, you want to say, okay, you've got multiple degrees of propulsion. You've got your glutes, you've got your calves, you've got your quads, you've got a lot of things helping you propel up a hill, but you've only got one thing helping you decelerate down a hill, and that's your quads. And that's where that patellar tendon comes in, and that's when you run out of power in your quads, your knees start to dive in on impact, and that's where you get that non-linear force through your medial and lateral ligaments of your knee. And so that's when you're sitting there going, okay, where's the path of least resistance here? What's strong? When that weakens, what's next strongest? And you'll find that your knee doesn't track all that well whilst you're descending. And so most people hate running down hills here, just because it hurts, because you've got gravity. And a lot of the times you're on stairs. A lot of the times you're on concrete. The stairs are different widths. They're particularly big steps, so they're quite deep. And you've got momentum taking you down them as well. So yeah, what you want to do is you want to find a way that you can bail on any run. So if you start to feel sore, that you've got an exit somewhere. So don't go out on something that, the loop's 30 Ks and you're 5 Ks in, because you're just going to have to turn around and do the 5 Ks back. When you're recovering from an injury, or when you're doing it, give it 2 days. Like most people have had DOMs before when they've done a big weight session, and it's like next day's not so bad, the day after is a disaster and you're really sore. You'll find that, give it a couple of days, see how your body reacts to that force. If it feels relatively okay and you're non-medicating with painkillers and the pain goes away after 2 to 3 days, then you feel okay. Well, you're pretty much right. But if you're still feeling it like through a tendon or through a particular joint 4 days later, well, especially if it's unilateral, not bilateral, well, then you're in trouble. And so that's when you want to just have someone diagnose it. It may be that treatment is a little bit of rest, or maybe the treatment is some, passive or mobility or exercises, whatever. You don't want to cost yourself a fortune getting a ton of unnecessary treatment. You just want an intelligent opinion on what's going on. And so, be the females in everyone and find out what's wrong and then deal with it, rather than be the male in everyone and go, nah, it'll be fine. So yeah, listen to your body and just like give yourself a bit of elasticity. Don't let ego get in the way of it. If you're running with someone and, you're hurting, pull up stumps, otherwise you're just pushing the boat out.
That's good. So yeah, it sounds like it's a good transition to start in a controlled environment. And then, like you said, wait the couple of days, listen to your body. If you're responding well after a few runs, then maybe you can dabble with a little hill. Yeah, give it a nudge. Okay. I wanted to quickly just, since we've got an expert here, I wanted to just talk about what you think the most common mistakes are that most amateur sort of struggling runners like me are making. And then I think you've probably already alluded to this, but we'll just hit it home to finish up here. What are a few cues that this population of struggling runners might be able to benefit from?
Overloading too fast is obviously the biggest one for beginner runners. Someone will go, yeah, that feels good. They'll go 5 to 6 to 8 to 10 to 15 Ks in the space of 3 weeks, and then they wonder why their knees are sore, right? And they go, okay. Thinking that weight doesn't count, it's I'm not going to fat shame anyone because I'm a heavy runner myself, but you just know that weight counts. So to put that into context, just say you and I both run a marathon and I'm 2 kilos heavier than you are. Well, that's 2.1 Newton tons of force that's going through my knees that are not going through yours. Like 2 Newton tons of force going through my knees for the sake of 2 kegs. I'm going to probably eat a little bit healthier. I'm probably going to make sure that I've got an okay power to weight ratio. I'm probably not going to have pies and chips and gravy, in the weeks leading up to it. A lot of my runners will cut a little bit, just even if it's psychological. They'll want to be half a kilo lighter going into a run than they normally are, because they just, they feel lighter, but just B, it's just pure physics. If you're lighter and you're just as strong, well, you're going to be faster and it's going to hurt less. And so weight does count. Don't overload too fast. Any sign of unilateral pain, you get it looked at. Bilateral pain is going to be relatively sensible and normal, and you'll recover from that. Have in the back of your mind that muscles repair quickly and tendons don't. And from that, you'll probably stop most of your mistakes. Make the least amount of mistakes as possible. Don't think that you need to optimize everything. You don't need to be doing VO2 max tests. You don't need to be buying the latest Nike Air Zooms or whatever the hell they are. You don't need to be buying, you don't want to have all the gear and no idea. You want to, make sure that you've got, the basics covered and you don't get injured. And then you can just progressively overload. Think of your phone book. So, knowing that you wanted to also touch on kids' athletics development, like you mentioned this just prior to the podcast going online, I do a lot of junior coaching. I do junior coaching of cricket and Australian rules football. We're talking at the moment with a really high level organisation in 26 Coaching who look after a lot of fantastic runners and triathletes in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is a place where you do have a bit of helicopter parenting. You've got certainly, like I've got 3 kids myself. You'll have real tiger parents in thinking that, my kid's excellent or my kid's better than next, or I want to provide my child with the most amazing amount of resources so that it's not my fault if they didn't succeed. And that's the key. A child will continue to succeed whether you want them to or you don't. They're going to have something inherently within them that says, okay, if you can provide a child with the confidence that they're okay to fail, then they'll either take it by the bit and they'll run with it or they won't, right? You're not going to be able to turn around and force a kid into anything. It's just not going to happen. The biggest problem that Hong Kong's got, or just generally as well, is that if you can make something a team sport, if you can make running a team sport, you'll keep participation levels up, which is going to be really exciting. If, as has been the case over the past 20 years, you'll have these kids who run like the wind, fantastic athletes, and they'll be wanting to represent their country at the Olympics, but then they'll go and play a team sport and never go back to running the 1500 because they want to hang out with their mates. They just want to play with their mates and be friends with their mates and these sorts of things. And, the Olympics, although it's great, it's a phenomenal amount of sacrifice. And so, but it's not fun, And so if I was to say anything, it's not an oppressive nature, but a certain degree of expectation that my child isn't doing as well as your child because you've provided them with more resources or you've given them a nudge. The less that you can do with your kids in some respects, the better. You want them climbing trees. You want them taking skin off their knees, stacking on their skateboard. You want them having a degree of proprioceptive awareness, which is an unnatural sort of reaction to a stimulus. You want to sit there and have, if they've tripped over, you want them to be able to either tuck and roll their shoulder or you want them to be able to do whatever. But one thing kids don't do in Hong Kong well is fall over. So we do, as a warm-up with regards to Australian rules football and cricket and these sorts of things, we tend to do a lot of rolling. We tend to do a lot of bear crawling. You tend to want people to fall over in a controlled manner because they just don't know how to, and they get injured falling over because they've never fallen over. Everything's been so protected and whatever else that kids don't know how to fall over. And so there's that component of trying to micromanage your kids' athleticism. And I know for a fact that, my kids are okay. They're somewhere in the middle, somewhere. I'm not, I've got enough knowledge that if I wanted to, I could try and sharpen them up if I wanted. But all I'm going to do is drive that child away from the sport that they like or make it too serious and so they don't enjoy it anymore. And so I have people telling me, oh, listen, can I bring my child in for gait analysis? Well, the key to that is that I can look at the way a kid runs and it'll change in about 3 weeks as they get stronger, they grow, their bones will change. Girls will go through puberty earlier and faster, so they'll get stronger and fitter and faster, and the boys will go through it later and they'll have testosterone messing with them. Their gait and their strength components will alter dramatically. We see a lot of junior netballers who's, it's every time they jump in the air and land, you feel like their knees are going to snap because they're like baby giraffes. It's all this sort of stuff, but you've just got to let them go. There's no point in touching these kids unless there's something significantly dysfunctional in a biomechanical facet other than saying, listen, if you can be strong through your hips, that's probably not a bad thing. If kids can be strong through their hips, it'll tend to protect their knees. Their ankles are pretty mobile because they haven't rolled them 1,000 times before they're 13, and so they should have decent ankles. But if you can give their hips decent strength, that'll create a huge amount of stability through their entire body. So if a parent says, I want to do gait analysis on my kid, well, no, because the output's going to be pointless and it'll mean nothing in about 2 months when your child's different. And if you coach someone, it makes everything very unnatural. And so wait until they're grown up. And so, you've just got to sit back and watch what happens. Give them some strength to make them robust. Make them know that if they fail, that's completely okay. Tell them not to be quiet if they're injured. And from that, you want them to find a way in which you can make individual sports such as athletics and swimming and these sorts of things a team environment so that you can keep that particular diamond in the rough or that unpolished gem, maybe an Olympic athlete.
Yeah, what sort of sparked it for me, it's similar just with kids not being fully developed yet and trying to have them over-specialize in a particular sport. And I was at a strength and conditioning conference once, and the strength coach was saying that this was at a high-level D1 school, elite athletes, sprinters, that actually needed to sort of be retaught how to sprint because they had been sort of honed in one sport and taught some things incorrectly. And you just sort of wonder, what if that kid just spent some time in gymnastics and spent some time in some strength and conditioning and wasn't just focused on that individual sport, just sort of doing lots of different things, like you said, climbing a tree and doing things more dynamically and just sort of being left alone to blossom is really important. Well, any last words, Dave, to close on?
Not particularly. First, thanks very much for having me on the podcast. It's been really enjoyable, and I've got a real passion for this, and I'm sort of suitably nerdy about it all, and it's something that we want to feel like isn't exclusive knowledge. You want to feel like you can debunk some myths. You want to stop people from making as many mistakes as they are so that they can enjoy it. Hong Kong's a great place. There's greenery everywhere. The only thing that you really can do is trail run here because there's not enough flat places to flat run. It's a dangerous place to get on your bike unless you get out at, 4 o'clock in the morning. So there's certain natural inhibitors to Hong Kong and staying fit and these sorts of things. And so if you can find a way of helping people do whatever they can do whenever they can do it, you're going to be a service to the community a bit. And so I'm not so altruistic to say that that's my key goal. I have great people and great projects that I like to see reach their potential. Is it going to be the person that's 25 kilos overweight lose 30 kilos? Mate, that'd be amazing. Get the mule to run a 41 minute, 10 to a 33 minute 10. That's fantastic. You feel the excitement on people. All I can say is that, podcasts like this will help build that community. The more interest we can have around making people not feel so afraid or over analytical about the way in which they keep themselves fit or get fit is good. You don't want people intimidated to think that I can't do that because I'm not good, or I can't do that because I think I'm not as athletic as I should be. You don't want someone to say, oh, I'm not going to go for a run with you because I'm slow. You just go, no, come on, let's go for a run. So if you can make things emotionally accessible as well as physically accessible, then I think that everyone's going to have a really good time of it, and you can sort of build a really deep community here that has got a lot of reciprocity. You'll find a lot of love comes back. So, thanks very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, David, so much for your time. I kept you for a long time, and you answered all the questions. Excellent. I hope everybody had their notebooks ready or goes back and listens again. There's a lot of good information there. And gold. Just where can we send folks to just check out more about Joint Dynamics? I think you guys have a website, correct?
Yeah, Joint Dynamics, we're in 2 locations. We're in Central on the corner of Queens Road and Pottinger Street. And we're also out in Taiku Place. We do a lot of our gait analysis and running analysis, and the more specificity out towards Quarry Bay. It's a bigger site. But if you jump on our website, or you can contact me direct if you like, just david@jointdynamics.com.hk. I'd be happy to get back to you with regards to any questions you have.
Thank you all very much for watching the show today. And also thank you to my special guest, David Jacquier, for coming on the show and sharing his awesome expertise. If you like this episode, please do us a solid and click the like button right down here. And also subscribe to the Boost Health TV channel by clicking right up here. Until next time, this is Paul Sandberg for David Jacquier saying goodbye and find your balance.